Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. I'm incredibly excited about this panel, and I hope you are too. We have 4 amazing panelists who are going to be sharing their insights on enterprise applications and VR, which I think is a really important topic right now. I am Stephanie Llamas. I come from SuperData Research, and I head our VR AR strategy, and these guys are really helpful in giving insights and the view of the world on the enterprise and the entertainment side for me. So I feel like everyone in this room is going to have a lot to take away. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Marcos?
Hi, my name is Marcos. I have my own consulting firm called Truth Ventures, but before that, most recently, I spent a lot of time at Unity helping to define the message around VR and AR and what Unity is doing. If you're unfamiliar with Unity, then I'm a little bit surprised, only because yeah, you surely shouldn't be here. Yeah, it's something like 70-ish% of the apps that are being created are using Unity's 3D engine and platform to create them. But anyway, I'm super excited about this. I'm still doing a lot of stuff in AR and VR.
Hi, everyone. Michael Yang. I'm with Comcast Ventures. We're a technology venture firm based here in San Francisco, and we're affiliated with Comcast Corporation. Along with another colleague of mine who's in the audience, we are the 2 folks who lead our VR, AR investments, and over the last couple of years, we've invested in 6 VR companies and 1 AR company.
Hey, I'm Vinay Narayan with HTC Vive. I run the product and ecosystem strategy for Vive, and big thing for us is always looking how VR is actually driving the industry and also driving value for industry worldwide, especially non-gaming.
Hey, I'm Ron Water. I'm with Samsung Research America, Director of Developer Advocacy there. I previously worked for a couple different mobile startups and AR startups, and at Sony PlayStation on both tech and the business side.
Great. So what I want to do is just start out setting the stage for the discussion on VR specifically, because there have been a lot of questions and there's a lot coming out about AR and MR. And so, to start, maybe Vinay, you can start letting us know what is it, specifically that's important about enterprise in the VR space as opposed to other spaces. Why should we look at VR right now?
Sure. VR has been around in the non-gaming enterprise space for 40 plus years. A lot of it has to do with fundamentally immersive technologies drives ROI, right? It gives you access. It does things because it's a tool. It's an immersive tool that drives value. And why is it so important now? Because it's consumerized. Now it's available off the shelf. And now us as different leaders in the space have access to this technology that NASA's been using for a long time. The government, the DoD's been using for a long time. In the educational institutional space, the studies, the ability to make that impact has been happening for a long time. But now the technology is here, it works. It's really up to us as industry professionals to really harness the power of that platform.
And so, for VR creators who are looking at enterprise as an opportunity, who maybe aren't experts in those particular fields, what are the opportunities for someone who's an expert on the VR side but maybe doesn't know about medical applications or engineering?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do is to partner with a professional that does. If you are a VR company or anybody going to these meetups, find those folks that are the customer experts. At the end of the day, the success for VR is the same path to success as any other product. Know the problem, know the customer, what is your value proposition, and find those that can help you fill in those blanks. So if you're in VR, your skill set is extremely valuable, how to tell that story. Find someone that knows the customer, and more particularly in the enterprise section, knows the value chain and where VR falls within that tool or that piece of the value chain that delivers an ROI.
And so, on the engine side, what are the skills, that those partnerships have been looking for, say using Unity or something like that? Well, what are the developers, their skill sets, maybe particularly with those engines? Are they looking for people who have had years and years of that experience, or is it something that, maybe someone can jump on board now?
Yeah, so the beautiful part, I think, about this is that it's all new. And so on some levels, there's some basics you need to understand about creating a program, all that kind of thing. But what VR has done, because it takes you into this immersive place, is you have to learn how to story tell in a very different way than you would when you're normally programming. And I think the same is going to remain true in the enterprise, because it's sort of like when many, many years ago I was at Schwab in the 90s and they said, oh, well, you're your customer. And I was like, my customer? But that's just another internal group. So there's a language that needs to be created. When I say storytelling actually is just how do you take someone through an experience. So it doesn't matter if you're a consumer or if you're in the enterprise, you still have to take someone through an experience. And so the way you take someone through an experience is very different when you're in a screen, like that laptop there, versus when you literally have to create a 360-degree egg around someone that they can kind of turn around and look up and down in any direction and even walk, right, within that space. And so how you tell stories and how you guide people through that space is very different. So that's a really important thing to be able to do. No one knows exactly how to do that. We're learning how to do that. We've been learning how to do that over the past, I would say, well, over the past 40 years on some levels, but I think it's been jacked up and basically speeded up over the past year and a half, 2 years. And so on some levels that lays out a more open playing field. The other thing is to find an environment that works for you. There are basically two-ish environments. Unity is one, Unreal is the other. Lumberyard has said they're going to be doing things, Crytek has said they're going to be doing things in VR, but nothing of any significance. Unity probably has anywhere from 50 to 80% of the space, and so that's probably a great tool for you to learn. So you're going to have to learn C# and really understand C#. And then it's a lot about how do you create an experience in the enterprise. And I've been doing enterprise for a very, very long time, and anyone up here will tell you the things that are important in the enterprise are how are you saving me money, or how are you saving the company money, and how are you making things more efficient or saving time. Those are the two most critical things. So if you take those as the backbone and then apply how do I guide someone through a VR experience to do one of those two things for a particular industry, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's you name it, right, NASA in space. Those are the skills that you need to start thinking about. And I think you're right. I think that people who are creating VR are going to need to connect with the specialists within a given industry, and there's going to need to be kind of a combination of those two, because it's very unlikely that you're going to find, someone who is an architect who knows VR. So the architect is going to partner with someone who understands how to create VR experiences.
Mm-hmm. Rob, how do you see the role of the platform itself or the device itself being part of maybe that matchmaking process, or is there something that you guys do to help that along?
That's a great question. I want to go back to a point that Marcos was making that kind of didn't necessarily lean in all the way to your question earlier, which is what do enterprise partners want? They just want somebody who can make good stuff. So they may not even be familiar with anything Unity or Unreal, and it's really about what's your portfolio, what's your productivity capability to deliver what it is that they need. And so there will be other tools in the future, like WebVR and other web-based stuff, that will come and be more important and open up different markets as well. When it comes to what the platform can do, the platform can just sort of act as a centralized point, right? If I'm in an enterprise space and I want to meet people in VR, I could come to a meetup or I could come to a conference and hope that I might accomplish that. It's not particularly easy necessarily, right? You don't know who's going to be here ahead of time. You don't know how you're going to find them to hook up with them and talk with them. So platforms can be a centralized point where the platform might already have some kind of relationship with enterprise partners. And that partner would say, hey, I'm looking to figure out how to do this. Do you have anybody in mind I could work with, or do you have a suggestion for how I can go about this? And the same is true for the developers as well. The developers are hoping to publish on platforms, so they want to be able to find ways to commercialize their game or arcade products, but they also want to find different users.
Got it. And so, Michael, you kind of look at this from a privileged perspective in comparison. I think, you're looking at a lot of different types of enterprise and a lot of different opportunities. Where are the opportunities that you're seeing?
So I think they're immense, and frankly, the way I would, what I'd say to you is I think we're looking at it inappropriately, meaning it's not about VR in enterprise. enterprises are just a series of business processes, right? And for you to really understand and how to create a software solution for them, you have to understand their underlying business process, right? I would say go to Salesforce.com's Force convention, right? I would go to SAP's big convention. I would go to Oracle World and stuff like that. Talking amongst other VR people isn't going to move the agenda for you in terms of getting an enterprise-oriented app into kind of corporate America, if that's your target, right? If you're a big company, you're thinking about Salesforce automation, customer relationship management, ERP, procurement, supply chain, and all that kind of stuff. So how is VR going to up the game in the context of those business processes? And when you buy software in an enterprise, ultimately you're looking for a ROI, and the ROI has to be the business process is either cheaper, faster, or better, right? So this isn't about whiz-bang visualization, because that in and of itself has not derived value. Visualization must lead to something else so that either fewer people involved, data propels new insights, and therefore you can do something economically better. But this is what I think is missing in the calculus today when we talk to application developers that want to target the enterprise. I've always, back to the original point, they don't need to know what the engine is. They don't need to know what the headset is. They don't need to know any bit about the technology. They just want to know how a knowledge worker in a company is going to adopt this thing and why their job is now freed up a day a week or something else like that. And as a result, there's bottom line to the next time they have to report to Wall Street, frankly. And I don't think we're at that point, at least the lion's share of folks that we meet, that are thinking that way. And I think it's largely because we have not cross-fertilized the DNA. If you're not sitting with software developers who've written traditional web-based software that's on a solutions basis, if you haven't spent time with an Accenture as a system integrator or somebody else, you're not really understanding the business problem that you're trying to address and apply VR to.
Can I add to that? Actually, just real quick, I think we may be slightly overcomplicating the opportunity. Actually, the opportunity is very simple and very straightforward, but the answer really depends on who you're speaking to. So just out of show of hands, how many of you are VR creators, developers in the audience? So take a look around. And next group, how many of you guys are enterprise professionals but are not VR creators, looking for those? Good mix. Hope you guys caught who that is, because in the near term, those are your partners, right? Because so enterprise is an interesting topic, right? Because I think, lump enterprise into non-gaming. Enterprise is all those things that you just said. There are very complex, big entities as you're trying to solve for that problem. But non-gaming is much broader than enterprise, right? Enterprise is a subsect of that. When you say enterprise, you're really thinking of education as a vertical. Now, am I going to try to solve education as a whole? Maybe, maybe not. But if you have an idea, both as a non-gaming kind of professional, or if you're a developer, find that partner and solve a very particular use case for them. If you can measure the problem, therefore you're able to measure the success, and that POC helps you to get traction, right? So in that process, you're going to understand who that customer is, how to develop that solution, and a lot of learnings in place. Where we are at in the ecosystem, you can learn, you can make mistakes, so take advantage of it, and definitely get involved as soon as possible, because this is not going away. It's only going to get deeper and bigger. And if you are a VR company doing something cool in enterprise and you want to share it, come talk to us. We'd love to talk about it. Actually, so JB's here in the audience. JB, you want to raise your hand? We also have Frank Black, who heads up our enterprise. Those two guys are always looking at folks to showcase very amazing things you're doing in the non-gaming sector for VR, and we're happy to talk to you about that.
Actually, I'm going to jump in because I would take it even one step further, which is I think that the name is misleading even of this talk, right? VR is True Killer App. I think the point is that everyone in the audience shouldn't think of themselves as VR developers or VR people. They should think of themselves as software people. Software people solve problems, right? Whether it's an Oracle implementation, whether it's whether it's NASA on the moon or on Mars who wants to be able to control the rover through a VR headset, which they do, and they have. You're solving a problem. VR just happens to be one way to get there, right? It's one way to solve problem X. So what you really need to do is, for a split second, it's not that you forget VR, but you sort of like put it to the side and you say, what are some core business problems? Like what are things that need to be made more efficient? And then is VR the right way to do that? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Maybe you start up some other company that has nothing to do with VR. But if it is, then you can start to say, okay, well, VR can, the VR approach will do X, Y, and Z. And what you might find out, and this is me having done 25 years of startups, what you might find out is that as you start to do this, you start saying, oh, well, I can do it in VR, but frankly, it's really not worth it to do it in VR because I'm not getting enough of a benefit. And so you either need to scrap the idea because you're so focused on VR that you can't go, or you need to say, maybe I need to tweak the idea this way. But I guess my point is it's not really about VR's true killer app. It's about what are the killer apps that VR can help to enable better or faster, cheaper, all those other kinds of things.
So it makes me think a little bit,
Or AR.
Or AR. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, so, a big question that a lot of people have right now, that I even have right now, is AR versus VR's role. And I think, on the VR side, we're a little bit more advanced in terms of the hardware and technology, and so it's a great opportunity right now. It's what's obvious right now. But, is it translatable? Is it something that if you do want to pivot to AR, MR, are you going to know the right tools by working in VR now?
That's a great question. I think the way to think about it is, what's the use case for AR for this problem versus the use case for VR? So AR allows you to see the real world, right? So if you need to actually have that pass through to the real space and interact in that real space, AR is the right solution. You're not going to rebuild the entire real world space in VR so that you can overlay on top of that, right? So if you want to redecorate your living room, maybe AR is the right solution. If you want to build your house from the piece of ground that is there right now, VR is probably the right solution rather than standing there and building the entire house with the grass in the background. And that's a really simplistic use case of it, but there are some other things as well, like what's the field of view that you need? What are the lighting situations that you have? And some of those might get solved in the future in terms of tech progressing, but if the headsets were at the same exact place right now, there still would be use cases that make more sense for AR and use cases that make more sense for VR.
And what about whittling that down to VR platforms? I mean, you work a lot in the mobile space, and it seems sometimes a little less obvious than using a Vive or an Oculus for a lot of applications. When is mobile the right choice?
Great question. I think there's huge trade-offs on both right now. There's kind of friction on both ends that make the choice right for one or the other. It's, if I walk into a doctor's office and I've got some medical therapy thing, I probably can talk him into working on a mobile device, but I probably can't talk him into figuring out how to set up a space in his doctor's office for a room scale device. At the same time, the room scale device has got far better total input, if you think about it that way, even with the 3DOF controller coming from mobile, and better visual fidelity. So there's this huge trade-off of what's my space and my capability to display this, and what's my ease of use or portability, or do I even really truly need these deep integrations? If I'm just teleporting and grabbing occasional devices, or if it's a situational awareness kind of training that I don't need to, have full capability of my hands, mobile might be a better choice.
I see. So I want to pivot a little bit to what you were saying about ROI, Michael, and looking at it actually at a monetization standpoint. What are some of the fields that you're seeing that are currently, if there are any, monetizable and profitable?
I think it's still early for that. To the earlier point, it's mostly experimentation, maybe some proofs of concept, but ultimately, if these are going to be enterprise businesses that want to be valued appropriately, then it has to be a SaaS subscription-based software licensing model, right? And corporations are accustomed to buying that, right? They're buying CRM, they're buying databases, they're buying a bunch of stuff in that way. I think there are, in the interim, actually services-based models, consultancy, right? Go into a company, advise them, strategy, then technology and vendor selection, then implementation of the technology, then training. You can get paid on a per hourly basis to do this, and ultimately, maybe even customize some software for that corporation, get paid that way. Potentially, it can lead to you being a product-based software company selling a VR experience against that, right? So those are what we would see as like near-term opportunities, but I think it's going to be very challenging to scale a pure software business, because you're also going to have to figure out, am I reselling these guys stuff? Am I sending people into an office or an institution to kind of do all that kind of stuff? Who's doing maintenance? None of that infrastructure is out there, whereas the rest of enterprise software and enterprise applications, it's readily available. So again, I would challenge VR folks to just step right into that. I mean, it's a multi-billion dollar global business that they don't know anything about VR. They're scared about VR, AR, and they frankly need your help. So that's where it can all come together.
I see. So how many of you out there currently work on VR consumer B2C products, if any of you? A few of you, okay. So, I wonder, I've heard some of your point of views on this, but I wonder a lot, that relationship, is enterprise a way to drive adoption for consumers and consumer products?
Yeah, definitely. I think all content that's impactful, applications that are impactful, that means something to someone, drives overall adoption. Right now, with the general consumer market, first of all, most folks still don't know what VR is. So there's a massive market that's kind of waiting to be addressed. But what most people relate to are the non-gaming scenarios. If you can, education's a great example. Everyone, when you talk about VR and education, everyone gets excited. Then it's like, well, how do you really do it? But ultimately, when you start to talk about, let's actually take a step back of where new technology, most new technology starts in the enterprise kind of space. It gets adopted when, in the example of PC adoption happened because you use Excel at work. And then you're like, hey, that makes a lot of sense. Now I'm going to use Excel at home. And then as we saw our parents or aunts and uncles use Excel at home on a PC, you're like, hey, you know what? What I'm going to do, I'm going to actually, instead of that Encyclopedia Britannica subscription, I can just put all that stuff in a CD, and that computer's going to help me with school. And all of a sudden, parents were like, yeah, that's great, but we used it to play games. But the thing is, the reality of it is, when you can take real-life use cases that are relatable, that show value, that's when the entertainment aspect is a nice-to-have or that secondary thing you do in addition to that. So, will enterprise drive adoption, non-gaming drive adoption for general consumer? It definitely will. It's happened many, many times, and it will continue to do that.
Okay.
I want to add to that a little bit. I think I love the Excel example. It's a perfect one, because where we're at right now with, if you think about VR in the workplace, let's forget about enterprise for a second, VR in the workplace. A lot of what we do in the workplace is text entry, or text reading or data entry. Neither of those are enjoyable in VR right now. So it's tough for those examples then to say, obviously, I have this at work, I need to have this at home. So we need to find those use cases that are more obvious at work, that would come back home. And a lot of the things that I think we'll get into early on for enterprise, whether it's real estate showcasing or whether it's training and simulation stuff, can be very, very cool and a great first exposure for somebody to VR, but it's not like, oh, I learned how to weld at work, so now I have to have this in my house. And if you look at the pillar points of presence that one of the keynote speakers had up earlier, one of the ones that'll be missing from work always will be the emotion or empathy side, right? You're not, maybe education, but in general, actually, you're trying to remove emotion from a lot of the use cases that you would have in the workplace, like situational training for doctors or police officers, or you're actually trying to train them just to be ready for the situation and to remove their emotion from that.
I actually want to challenge that for one point, actually. What we're seeing, you talk about profitability in that space. So are companies profitable in VR? They definitely are. They're making money. Actually, one of the areas they are is empathy training in professional situations. So what ends up happening is, in the medical field specifically, empathy is not, so sympathy versus empathy. A lot of people think empathy is because you feel sorry for somebody and therefore you're gonna understand. So sympathy comes from having a set of understanding based on knowledge. Empathy comes from firsthand experience. we know from a fact that empathy drives longer adoption, longer knowledge. Stanford did a study where they were trying to reduce consumption of, or cutting down trees because they found out that soft toilet paper is made from non-recycled trees. Long story short, they actually did a study where they actually showed one group read a paper on the impact of cutting down trees and toilet paper. Another group actually saw a really great video. Another group actually experienced it in VR. Only the VR group 3 months later actually reduced their consumption of soft toilet tissue. So what you do in that particular scenario at work, police training, for example, understanding that you may not realize that when you're in this variety of scenarios and variables, you may react a certain way. Now in VR, you can turn down or really kind of have that self-awareness based on empathy, based on different situations. Same thing with medical professionals. When you see a patient with a very specific medical condition, through their own eyes, you're going to start asking very different set of questions. Where's the ROI on that? Misdiagnosis. Then all of a sudden, your path to that solution becomes a lot quicker. So you are right. I think there is that kind of, we do different things at work as we do at home, and I think it's kind of finding that right kind of overlap of when that actually makes sense.
So now I know what I should do about toilet paper, but I knew I'd learned something at this panel. No, I was actually going to challenge something slightly different. I'm glad I got a chuckle out of the guys up here because everyone out there is like deadpan. So it was interesting talking about Excel driving PC. I remember those days. I mean, I'm old enough to remember even before those days. I think this is actually a little bit different, and I would say that the consumers are going to drive adoption more than most people would normally give credit for. And the example I'm going to point to back to like on all sorts of inappropriate topics is that porn drove the internet. It's the reality. Porn drove VHS, porn drove, it's driven a bunch of things. Now the reason I mention that is because PCs were around for porn to drive the internet. And so we fundamentally have the PCs around. They're mobile phones, they're actual PCs, and the devices are kind of existing. And so while I wouldn't say that consumer adoption is going to be the sole driver of VR, I think it is going to be a way more significant driver of VR than we think. And the reason is a couple different things. One is consoles. We haven't talked at all about consoles, and consoles are going to be a great entryway because they are basically a $400 or $500 pretty simple, low purchase price to get into I've played a bunch of different games. It's a pretty amazing experience for first gen. I think they will get significantly better, but they're pretty amazing experience first gen, and those consoles are going to not drive enormous adoption, but start to kind of get the ball rolling. I also think that VRcades and VR experiences from people like Universal and all these other folks are going to start to help to drive consumers to understand that VR can be a very cool thing that they can use. I also think mobile is going to be a huge driver because at the end of the day, I worked on this keynote and we did a bunch of research and we're thinking about what is going to drive all this adoption, and we just looked at the numbers, right? 1.5 billion PCs in the world, of which a very small percentage can drive a high-end device. I love high-end devices, so I'm by no means trying to bash them. 3 billion smartphones, of which a much larger percentage can actually drive a very basic, pretty decent VR experience. So I think my overall point is that yes, enterprise is definitely going to drive adoption, but I don't think we should sell consumers short. I think that it's going to be, unlike before, not one or the other, but both together, because we're driving a far more complex feature set with far more complex hardware field, and the ability for smartphones to get into third world countries that are capable of doing some of this stuff is so great. That never existed. We didn't have that reach like we did before, which is why my theory around why the bubble hasn't burst around VC in the industry is there's just far more people to make money off of because smartphones have given us a much larger reach around things. So anyway, not to hijack.
No, please.
I'm going to jump on a couple themes there. One is the friction involved with adopting VR or AR is still too high, right? The stigma, the behavioral, the cultural norms, and all that kind of stuff. So that's why enterprise or corporate setting is actually good, right? If you're using VR or AR in a company, it's because you have to for your job. If you want to get paid and keep your job, you're going to do it and you're going to master it, right? So if it looks stupid or whatever, you're still going to do it. If this is a consumer purchase only, you're going to elect to, and then all the associations with that have to be overcome, which we're all still kind of working on. That's the first point I have to say. So that's why I think enterprise is vastly important, just from a behavior perspective. I think second, you need its purchasing power, right? Costs are still too high, right? You need to drive things down. You need to scale economics that the enterprise buying of this kind of medium will bring to bear. And then I think third, to your point, I think it's going to be more mobile than it's going to be PC-based. Because think about it, how hard was it over the last 10, 15 years for most companies to be comfortable with employees either BYOD or ultimately issuing iPads and iPhones and all that kind of stuff, right? The CTOs, CIOs, they fought that for years, right? But finally they got over it, and now they're issuing it. You get it as a new employee, the whole 9 yards. So if they know there's a device that's compatible for this new computing platform already in everybody's hands, and you gave it to them, then why not leverage that, right? As opposed to a CapEx in terms of setting up a conference room or an office or any of that kind of stuff to do something, which is truly PC tethered and room scale. There will be instances of that, but they better have reached a high enough bar to kind of clear it to justify that deployment of capital and real estate, frankly.
But on the mobile side, I mean, mobile phones that can run VR are still pretty expensive, right? So, how would a...
but not in the not in the markets where enterprises give a shit about it. I mean, frankly, if you think about it, if you're working at an enterprise kind of a play, you've got a pretty nice smartphone. So it might not be third world countries, it might not be second world countries, but certainly all of Europe, all of North America, that's a lot of enterprises. And I think it'll depend on the application too, right? So, a training application, if I'm a McDonald's employee and I need to go through my McDonald's training and I can have someone set up and, they just pop their phone on there and they look around, they're like, oh, I should turn off the fryer, and oh, I need to make sure, those kinds of basic things like sanitation and all the, that kind of stuff is great for mobile because it's dirty, it's fast, it's quick, and you just like throw it on there. Whereas I remember we got this guy who did a VR experience because this company was literally shipping $1 million pump just for training. It was an industrial pump, right? And so they would ship this pump out, they'd train the people on it, and they would ship the pump back. And almost every single time the pump came back broken in some way, shape, or form. So they redid the whole thing in VR, and now they don't ship the pump out. And they don't, they don't have to damage it. So I think to your point, and what I'm trying to get at is there's different types of applications where each of them become important. And I don't think that the cost of a smartphone for the vast majority of enterprise applications, because remember the key word here being enterprise, these guys have money. We're not talking about mom and pop shops. Maybe it's the M and SMB. It's arguably in the United States it's the S too, but maybe in other countries it's maybe M and up, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't care. $500-600, and most people in those types of countries already have access to that. So I think that the mobile access is really kind of almost moot because Samsung, you guys have your 8's coming out soon, the 7 runs. I've played some really cool games. I've even seen some really good medical training VR apps that were done on an S7. It's like, that's a perfect example of pharmaceutical rep. Hey, slap this on. This is exactly how the drug inhibits blah, 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 blah. That kind of a thing where it's down and dirty and fast. And it actually creates empathy from the doctor to be like, oh, I see how that works. So exciting. That kind of a moment. Yeah, that's mine.
And actually, just want to double click on that real quick. So enterprise is a very unique space in that price doesn't really matter if it drives the value, right? So when you start to really talk about numbers, whether it's $400 and $500 for mobile-based or double that for PC-based. So the question really is, as you guys are kind of investigating different solutions and platforms, AR, VR, really understand what these tools are. Just like a hammer and a nail gun, they essentially accomplish the same task, but they're used in different cases and have different benefits. So as you're going down this path, understand where this technology falls in the spectrum. So there's actually an inverse of immersion, of technologies that allow higher degrees of immersion, also have a smaller total addressable market. So on the left-hand side, being the least immersive, but still immersive, is mobile. Then you have all-in-ones, then you have console, and then you have PC-based. But on the flip side of the curve is also the total addressable market, high to low. So as you're trying to figure out the solution, you have to ask yourself, how much immersion do I really need? And in the case of actually training, if you're trying to give somebody just a really quick walkthrough, actually, so there was a McDonald's training that they started on mobile and it on Vive, because they realized you actually had to do less retraining on a PC-based because you have more inputs, more immersion. Now, if they started on a Vive, would they have been successful? I don't know, because mobile was much more accessible at the time. So as they're trying to show this concept of saying, here you go, try this on real quick, like, that's weird, like, oh, okay, that's cool, right? That mobile allowed that conversation to happen, but that true immersion was more of the PC-based kind of the Vive experience, or whatever. Again, at the end of the day, there might be other things are equal. Actually, what's most immersive is a flight simulator, right? So there's a cost to that as well. And so anyways, I guess the point is, know the technology, know the tool set, and just, they all matter, right? So it's all really important to know when to use, how much VR do you really need.
Think like a software entrepreneur, not like a VR person, right? Like that. Just that's all.
What about console? Is that in any way going to participate in enterprise?
Probably not
No?
in enterprise.
I don't see it. I'm ex-Sony, and I know they have a lot of partnerships with entertainment companies and non-gaming applications, but I don't. It's a hard sell at work to say I really need to buy a PS4 so
Really?
I can get my job done better. That's a hard sell.
Yeah.
But AR. You didn't ask about AR.
What do you mean I didn't ask about
I
AR?
well, it's funny because I know it's a VR panel, but I am of the ilk that actually long term AR is probably going to be, sorry everyone, a much bigger moneymaker in the enterprise and a much larger part of the enterprise than VR ever could be.
Can I ask you though, how do you define AR? Because there's
Right.
Pokemon AR, there's
Right.
HoloLens
And so
AR.
here's the trick, right? So there are technologies that already exist and are getting refined around photogrammetry that allow you to basically map and create the physics of a room, which then allow you to more smartly and intelligently overlay. So in reality, it's all just virtual reality. Like even the AR and MR thing kind of disappeared to some extent over time. But you know, if you can imagine the number of ways, back to I think an earlier point around, is it a closed environment where I'm mapping out the whole room versus the room is here, I just need to overlay data and information that makes sense for people, right? The amount of enterprise application that I can imagine and the things that I can imagine I can't imagine are so great around, I just have, okay, maybe it's the glasses eventually, and maybe those glasses have a nice thin film on them that, you know, a substrate that's excited and creates basically, you know, a little field of view right on the glasses. And then, you know, there's a little camera here that does the photogrammetry and overlays the room so that when my, you know, virtual assistant for my insurance company, because there was an earthquake and I'm assessing damage, can actually look at the room and see what's going on and instantly calculate things, you know, on an ongoing basis. Oh, there's a crack in the wall, you need to send someone. Oh, you know, this is broken, that's probably $1,000 worth of damage, and it's processing it just from me looking around and then putting input. Like any, you know, that, the variety and scale and depth of things that can happen in AR, I think will eventually vastly outweigh things that people will want to do in a closed environment. That's not to say it's not an important business and it's not something that can't make a lot of money, but I think in the long term, the scale of the types of things that we can do with augmented reality once the technology is there, and I would argue that technology is really kind of 3 to 5 years out, not 5 to 10. Vuforia is pretty much it when it comes to augmented reality. They already have 500 million devices that they're tracking globally, right? So people are using this. China is actually the #1 country for AR usage right now, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. But you know, that to me has a much larger long-term impact and likely to be an area where there will be just a lot more money.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that I'm most impressed with Microsoft and both HoloLens and kind of their go-to-market vision. So Microsoft is the preeminent enterprise company from a productivity, kind of knowledge worker basis, and you know, the delivery of how they think about go-to-market on the enterprise side is through the Windows platform, right? That's an operating system we've all been using. Developers have been writing client-side software against for years, right? What they have orchestrated is vertical orientation as well as software developer orientation to go after the markets on that front, right? And it's just, they are so much superior to kind of everything I see down here in the Valley in terms of just focusing on technology and features and functions and this advantage, because that's not the language of what the buyer that Microsoft sells stuff to is looking for. You know, I can suffer field of view, right? I can suffer latency. I can suffer this, and this. But you know what? You created a training application. It actually integrates into my learning management system, so I can authenticate that Vinay is actually an employee, you know, but Marcos isn't, so why was he taking the training? Like, that's just as interesting to me as an enterprise kind of solution as what the content and the actual thing is. I'll give the example back to the AR conversation. Sean Brown is one of the leading technology leaders at Stryker. Stryker makes hospital beds and other things. They recently disclosed kind of a case study with HoloLens. And what started off as Stryker looking for immersive technology to help a business pain point led to a huge win for HoloLens. What he was trying to solve for is, I sell these expensive hospital beds. Hospitals in the country are making new hospitals all the time, right? We're all seeing them in our community, these mega hospital systems, and they're just adding more rooms and more beds. Well, that's a big purchase decision by a hospital in terms of if I'm going with your beds or if I'm going with another manufacturer's beds, et cetera. But how do you sell that, right? You can show some pictures, you might show a video, you do a presentation. What if you could actually put the buyer in AR so they could actually walk around a hospital room with the bed in it? They could see, oh, I want taller beds, I want smaller beds, I want this, I want to move it here in the corner and all that kind of stuff. They can visualize it to the level of immersiveness, right? And that was tremendous. They also sell beds that go into ambulances, which is like, oh, that's interesting. Well, you got to figure out, like, you got to, like, they flex, you got to be able to lift them and all that kind of stuff. So you have to figure out simulations because ambulances are trying to shrink their footprint as well. So this is not a VR or an AR kind of technology problem. This is a, do you know how to sell to somebody buying hospital beds problem, right? And do you know how to partner with the people that do it? Microsoft didn't know how to do it, but they knew systems integrators and consultants that sold into Stryker, and they paired them up with small software developers that were interested in working on the HoloLens platform and said, you guys go create this app that Stryker can use in their sales force. And today, there are 100 different Stryker salespeople that have HoloLens that they go to market with. Like, it's in their toolkit, right? They show up at the hospital like, boom, put this on, right? And we'll take you through a pitch. That's enterprise to me, and that's what we're looking for.
Great. Well, I want to open it up to you guys and see, do you have any questions for our panelists? Yes.
Hey, thanks for the talk, guys. My name is Brian Empert. I work on I guess it's a data management app called Noda. It's on Steam right now, but it's on Steam and Viveport and Oculus Home, which is a consumer-facing store. But it's an application I think might work for knowledge workers in general. But it's not really set up, those stores aren't really set up to sell into the enterprise. I mean, who at work wants to go in and see the space shooting game next to my productivity app? So how does that work to sell to businesses when the only app stores out there are sort of geared for consumer sales? And another point on that is what you mentioned about things like single sign-on and maybe security in general. Auditing, things like that. That's not part of the store. It's not really part of Unity either. So is there a way to kind of bring those in without writing everything from scratch?
I can answer the first part. So I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or if I'm allowed to say this, but so Viveport for enterprise is a thing, and to really kind of solve that kind of problem. So the ultimate kind of goal for Viveport was non-gaming content, because you do want to be able to not have to go through a long list of other experiences and really kind of find your vertical. So that's kind of been really the vision for Viveport, is to kind of penetrate that market, as well as there's some other things, there's some other challenges to selling into enterprise, and that's why we have professionals like Frank Black, who's here as well. I'm sure he can answer a lot of your questions on that. But it takes years of Microsoft's experience of enterprise of how do you sell that stuff in, and that's essentially from a non-gaming content distribution platform is really what Viveport Enterprise aims to solve for. And then after that, once you can get in behind the firewall, then you can address issues like single sign-on and other things like that. But a very real problem and one of those things that we aim to solve.
I think that you're struggling with a problem right now, and so this isn't necessarily going to solve it. But I think WebVR is a really interesting future technology for everybody. All the companies are backing WebVR pretty largely, which is surprising considering they also have walled gardens that will be broken down by WebVR. WebVR will allow you to tap into a lot of other services that you could get through the web to help you with some of those problems. And then, of course, you're not necessarily going to be posted up next to the Starship shooting game. So,
the other thing I would say, and this is just, I spent 20 years in B2B startups, is that there's a moment where you don't want to reinvent the wheel because you don't need to, which is an odd roundabout way of saying, yes, VR as a tech is new, but enterprise sales is enterprise sales is enterprise sales. And so one of the things which I was trying to kind of get at before when I was saying, forget the VR portion for a moment. You are a startup. If that's what, maybe you're not, maybe you just want to be consulting, but let's assume you have a product. You are a startup. You need to not think like a VR creator, and you need to think like a startup that is trying to break into the enterprise market. And one of the channels may not be available to you. So you may not be able to go out through some of the more traditional VR channels, but guess what? Most enterprises are not buying on there anyway. So on some level, who cares, right? That's not the point. You need to think, if I'm a startup and I have an enterprise software product, how am I going to build a company around supporting that, and how am I going to build a sales infrastructure around supporting that? And that's the approach you need to take. Because again, back to my, I tend to be a fix-it guy. People bring me in and I fix shit. And if I'm looking at a mountain and I see that I can't get over the mountain, I am always an entrepreneur, and that means, okay, can I dig underneath it? Can I go around it? And this is the moment where you need to think of yourself as an entrepreneur, not as a VR person, and say, great, can't sell through that channel. Guess what? No one's buying through that channel anyway, so who cares? So how do I build an enterprise sales team, or how do I break into enterprises, or how do I decide on saying, I really only want to focus on the health market, or I want to focus on, what are those different horizontal and vertical markets that you want to focus on, and then focus on designing a company around selling your product into the enterprise on that level. And it will be wonderful if someday Oculus and all these other guys figure it out and realize they need to have an enterprise channel. But that's not how enterprise works today, even for normal software companies, right? So back to my whole thing. You're a software company, you're creating a piece of software, act like one. Forget about VR, that's just a medium. That's like saying, oh, I'm Ruby on Rails, or I'm C++, or I'm, that's all it is. VR just happens to be another way that people are getting stuff. Act like you think of yourself as a startup, and then start to create a channel strategy based on that.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
This is more like challenge than question. I work for Virtual Life. I'm responsible for the China market. I know you probably know what Virtual Life does, but in China we do VR for enterprise. We go with the auto industry and the sports industry. The two challenges you're facing, one, I work for HP Enterprise Software for over 10 years, but my risk guy is like for consumer. Most of VR guys for consumer. To explain them what is a requirement gathering process, and what is SaaS, and then it's just a pain in the ass. And the one hand is a SaaS sauce. It's talking about sauce, not SaaS. Well, it's just like a pain in the ass. That's the first thing. And so I end up spending more time to internal communication than external communication. And the second challenge, especially in China, and is VR. The current bandwidth you can like mobile, you can post on server, right? And for VR, you have to download all the assets local, and then they involve a piracy issue, right? And how do you solve the piracy issue? We want to
You don't.
we want to bring a SaaS service, but how do we do that? But it's just like a lot of challenges. Yeah.
So what would you like to ask the panelists?
So, well, I said it's more like challenge than
Yeah,
question.
yeah, I understand.
I think real quick, I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, that's what us as a community are gonna solve for. A lot of the pain points you mentioned, just even through our ViveX program, seeing a lot of companies solve for that. But the challenges that we have of adoption is also the opportunities of adoption. If this was a well-baked industry that's far gone, our opportunities to actually make those changes are gonna be very small. So because there's a lot of that challenge, there's also a lot of opportunity, and as a community, we're gonna solve for quite a bit of that. But the most importantly, understand something, the technology is here to drive changes in the enterprise market. Understand what the technology is for that tool, what part of the value chain you're gonna solve it for, and then solve for it.
So I want to get to one more question. You in the last row in the middle, yes.
Hi, my name is Rika, and hi, Rob. I recently became co-chair alongside my colleagues Amy Peck and Nick with DataViz of the Enterprise Committee with the ERARA. And my question is, industry agnostically thinking, is there an opportunity for players in the space to piggyback off of other disruptive technology that enterprises are considering and VCs are putting money into as a way to amplify the opportunities? And specifically, I'm thinking about AI, machine learning, and robotics, because there might be unique ways that even though VR is just another thing, but does VR, AR, whatever, enable a different way of those other technologies to manifest? And is there a way that companies and ventures can piggyback off of that?
I assume that's directed at me. Here's the honest to God answer I would give you, which is try not to conflate too many trends, memes, and technology. You know, like the story's already hard enough if it's VR and AR by itself. To tack on AI or robotics or all these other things, while they might be convergent or complementary, just again sit in the shoes of the buyer, right? Like the buyer has to be educated on all these things and then has to be convinced that they want all these things. That's a lot of headwind that you're signing up for, right? So I would be like, okay, if we're about data visualization, I'm not sure I would try to expose we use AI for this, it's done in VR and AR and all that kind of stuff. You gotta keep it a lot more simpler, right? And I think all those other technologies and the startups in those space, they are struggling to get commercial traction as well, right? So putting two rocks together does not allow you to float to the top faster. In fact, it probably drags you down to the bottom more, right? So that's what I would caution.
Great.
I would only add to, just again, back from the startup perspective, find your use case. It's more like the technology is just something that enables a use case. Like you almost want to like, I tell stories for a living, and if I'm telling you a story, I want to tell you about how data visualization is going to save you money, and how when I walked into CAT, they were spending 25% of their time just solving for problem X. And by using this data visualization technique, they were able to cut that in half, right, and save X million dollars. And you don't even need to say VR, because as soon as you say cut it in half and save X million dollars, they're going to say, and how did you do it? And you're like, that's a great question. We did it because we were able to bring this VR technology, blah, blah, blah. You sort of get it. But the point is it's about telling the right stories, and the right stories isn't adding more stuff to the stories, right? Like it just ends up distracting. People have very short attention spans. I wrote this article a long time ago about how we have to create more Happy Meals in the software industry, because at the end of the day, no one wants a big long menu of 50 million things that they can add. They want 6 different Happy Meals, right? That's how you sell into the enterprise. You give them 6 different Happy Meals, and oh sure, you can change the toy out, and you can get milk instead of Coke, and you can, maybe you don't want your French fries, you'll get an apple. But it's 6 different Happy Meals. So that's how you need to think about it, more as a packaging problem than as adding more technology and making it seem more complex.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I know there are a lot more questions, so I encourage you to come and speak to the panelists after we close. But thank you so much, and thank you guys so much for all of the great insights.